The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
As you may know, AT&T is trying to buy Time Warner for the tidy little sum of $85 billion. That's not news. We've talked about that before when the news broke of that at least attempted sale. The news is that the Justice Department has now sued to block that purchase. And this could be one of the biggest antitrust cases in decades. And it's particularly newsworthy because usually antitrust cases are attempts to stop mergers of two of the same type of company, two media companies, for example. And in this case, the AT&T Time Warner purchase or merger is a telecommunications company trying to buy a media and entertainment company, and trying to block those types of mergers or acquisitions, I guess to say, is it's less common territory for courts. And it's really putting some progressives and also Democratic elected officials in an interesting place because, generally speaking, the left wants to prevent unfair and sort of obscene accumulations of market power through these mega mergers. Progressives want antitrust legislation enforced as needed, as would be, as designed, I guess is the term I'm looking for. And the issue, of course, is that CNN is owned by Time Warner, and all of this is happening after the Trump-Jeff Sessions Justice Department has been very critical of CNN. And you have to wonder, could this be part of an attempt to merely hurt CNN, which we know President Trump doesn't like, right? Is this lawsuit to try to stop this merger acquisition an act of political retribution against CNN? And we may find out, because AT&T says that it's going to take the lawsuit as an opportunity, take the court process as an opportunity to try and discover and reveal communications that may have taken place between the White House and antitrust officials, and that it could potentially uncover political motivation. Now, if they're smart, they wouldn't have email records of the Trump White House saying, hey, let's try to screw with CNN. But we know that the Trump administration has a pretty extensive track record of putting really sketchy stuff into email. The entire Russian lawyer situation comes to mind. So if political motivation over this lawsuit were uncovered, the argument would be that Donald Trump is effectively abusing his power as president to make a political attack against the private sector, which is not something that conservatives usually are on board with. AT&T's general counsel, their attorney, made a comment that I read, and I really felt very conflicted about it. David McAtee II, who's AT&T's general counsel, said, today's Department of Justice lawsuit is a radical and inexplicable departure from decades of antitrust precedent. Vertical mergers like this one are routinely approved because they benefit consumers without removing any competitor from the market. We see no legitimate reason for our merger to be treated differently. Let's keep that on the screen for a moment and analyze a couple of the individual sentences. It's true that this lawsuit is a departure from precedent. These mergers typically are approved. It's completely accurate when David McAtee II says that these are routinely approved mergers. It's not clear at all, though, that they benefit consumers the way he argues. And in principle, it would be great to clamp down on these mega mergers because they aren't good for consumers. But if the reason is a political one, that Trump wants to hurt CNN, then as progressives, do we have to be against it because it's a form of government corruption? Or do we need to be for it because it is a mechanism through which we are supposed to prevent this obscene and massive accumulation of market power? The mergers allow companies like AT&T and Time Warner to raise prices, to suppress competition. It's really bad. It's something we've been talking about for years. But at the same time, a personal vendetta by Donald Trump can't be allowed to serve as the sort of catalyst for blocking the merger, since we know that Republican administrations and right-leaning justice departments like the one we have right now are usually pretty friendly to these types of mergers, and the White House can't be playing favorites. Kind of a complex situation for progressives. Which side should we be on? Send me your thoughts. I'm on Twitter. Reach me, email, however. We have yet another one of Donald Trump's cabinet members caught insulting Donald Trump's intelligence. Back in October, you might remember, I told you the story of Secretary of State Rex Tillerson calling Donald Trump a moron. That happened after a July 20th meeting at the Pentagon, according to multiple senior Trump administration officials. It was never denied by Tillerson. Tillerson came out to deny other parts of the reports, like, for example, that he had just recently been talked out of resigning as Secretary of State, but he never actually denied what we now know to have been an accurate allegation, that he called Trump a moron. We now have a new leak, which tells us that at a dinner with a tech CEO, National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster, the guy who replaced disgraced National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, McMaster allegedly said that Donald Trump has the intelligence of a kindergartner, called him an idiot and a dope, according to 5 sources with knowledge of this conversation. This was a dinner a couple of months ago. We're only now learning about it, but it was a dinner a couple of months ago that involved H.R. McMaster, again, the national security advisor for Trump, and the CEO of the company Oracle, the tech company Oracle, Safra Catz. And as the story goes, McMaster was very blunt and in this really upfront way just destroyed Trump in front of her. And what's hilarious about this is that the behavior was described by Catz herself as jaw-dropping, although she didn't specifically say, well, he said kindergartner or stupid or dope or whatever the words were, but you have the Trump administration and some other Oracle staffers denying it. I quite frankly don't believe the denials. At this point, given the 10 months at this point, actually almost 10 months to the day of Donald Trump as president, we've seen these routines any number of times at this point, and by and large, the assertions of what was said end up being true. And the trend is that anyone who's even remotely intelligent, and I consider H.R. McMaster to be a pretty intelligent guy, despite the fact that I would have political disagreements with him, everybody who's reasonably intelligent that gets close to Trump immediately realizes that the guy is just unfit to be president of the United States. And even more interesting is that at this dinner, at the same dinner, according to 3 sources, H.R. McMaster didn't just talk, what's that term Trump uses, talk bad about Trump. He was also reportedly slamming Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, Secretary of Defense James Mattis, Stephen Bannon, at the time, who was a White House advisor, and Donald Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. And there's a couple takeaways here. First, it can't possibly be surprising to any reasonable person that anybody in this administration who has a good head on their shoulders would be mocking Trump in private, right? That should come as absolutely no surprise to anybody. More interesting to me is that there seem to be these rifts within factions of the Trump administration. You've got McMaster and Tillerson, who both apparently question Trump's intelligence, which makes sense. But then you have McMaster being critical of Tillerson as well. We've heard that Chief of Staff John Kelly has been concerned about the involvement of Jared Kushner so close to the president of the United States. That is the most interesting element of this for me. And the sort of bigger picture here that we're building is that foreign leaders think that Trump is a moron. Many members of Trump's own team think that the guy is incompetent. Obviously, my audience has realized it from the beginning. So we're realizing that it is this group of ideologically committed Trumpists that just revile the guy as some kind of brilliant player of 4D chess, some hero, but they are increasingly the only ones who don't seem to get that the guy is totally unfit. But, and this is where it really gets concerning, that might be enough to get Trump reelected. Even if we get Trump's approval rating down into the low 30s as it's been, or even with a 2 in front of it, 29, 28%, I've done the math before, that could still get Donald Trump reelected as president in 2020. And that's why, as progressives, we've got to be activating at every opportunity. The most pressing one is December 12th, the special election where Roy Moore might lose and we might have a Democrat replacing Jeff Sessions in that vacated Senate seat. But we can't just look away and say we don't have to worry because the guy's obviously a moron. Even with 30% approval, those 30% can get this guy reelected. Send me your thoughts. I'm on Twitter at @dpacman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Scott Dawson. Scott Dawson is a great guy, and Scott Dawson now joins our existing roster of longtime members and supporters. And without Scott's support, without everybody's support, we really couldn't be doing what we're doing. And that has never been more true than 2017, between the Amazon affiliate program shut down for the David Pakman Show and YouTube demonetization. It's been bad. So thanks to Scott, thanks to all of our long-term and sustaining members. And we are going to have a Thanksgiving special. It's sort of a counter Black Friday special. And if you want to be notified about that towards the end of the holiday week, just get on our mailing list at davidpakman.com. Upper right of the website, you'll see a field where you can enter your email address, and then you'll be notified about the upcoming membership special. And of course, we are trying to get to 2,500 Patreon contributors. We're at 2,100 and change as of this morning. And you can add one more, pledging as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Well, it is sexual harassment bingo, and our next winner is Charlie Rose, the longtime host of The Charlie Rose Show on PBS and Bloomberg, co-host of CBS This Morning. He's a correspondent for 60 Minutes. He has now been accused, as reported by the Washington Post, of the sexual harassment of 8 different women. The Washington Post actually spoke to the 8 women in question. The allegations include everything from lewd phone calls and walking around naked in their presence to groping of breasts and genitals. And the pattern is one of Rose in a position of power, right? All 8 women were employees or wanted to work for Charlie Rose at the Charlie Rose Show. The timeline for these allegations goes from the late 1990s to 2011. The ages of the women at the time of the incidents ranged from 21 to 37 years of age. Charlie Rose, as of today, is 75. And as with lots of these situations, the similarities between the women's stories are notable, and the Associated Press tweeted that Charlie Rose has been suspended and that PBS is stopping production and distribution of The Charlie Rose Show, saying, quote, "Breaking, CBS News suspends Charlie Rose, PBS to halt production and distribution of show following sexual harassment report." Charlie Rose himself has also put out a statement where he said, quote, "In my 45 years of journalism, I have prided myself on being an advocate for the careers of the women with whom I have worked. Nevertheless, in the past few days, claims have been made about my behavior towards some former female colleagues. It is essential that these women know I hear them and that I deeply apologize for my inappropriate behavior. I am greatly embarrassed. I have behaved insensitively at times, and I accept responsibility for that, though I do not believe that all of these allegations are accurate. I always felt that I was pursuing shared feelings, even though I now realize I was mistaken. I have learned a great deal as a result of these events, and I hope others will too. All of us, including me, are coming to a newer and deeper recognition of the pain caused by conduct in the past and have come to a profound new respect for women and their lives." Well, fortunately, Charlie Rose has learned a lot, and he is gaining a newfound respect for women as a result of the fact that 8 women have accused him of sexual harassment. That's great, right? I hate to say it, but when I heard this, I was not at all surprised. Charlie Rose is a good interviewer. There's no doubt about it. I have really enjoyed his program over decades at this point. But in everything I have observed of Charlie Rose, both on his show and outside his show, when he's been interviewed, little anecdotes that, for example, Howard Stern has told about Charlie Rose on the Howard Stern Show, a lot of other little stories, Charlie Rose has always struck me as exactly the type of hyper arrogant and super pompous guy that would have both the interest and the audacity, because you need both, to try to use his position of power in exactly this way. And with some of the people that we've heard these allegations about, I say, wow, that is genuinely surprising to me. I would never have guessed that that person or this person would have been accused of this. With Charlie Rose, I was completely not surprised. I read the headlines and said or thought to myself, that sounds about right. And we'll see who the next one is. Every morning it's someone these days. Just an hour ago, we found out about Democratic Congressman John Conyers having settled a sexual harassment allegation for some $27,000. And I actually think that in this age of empowerment and sort of looking deeply at these allegations, isn't it time to really deeply and seriously look and investigate all of the claims of sexual assault against our president, Donald Trump, which include, up to and including, I think is the phrase I'm looking for, rape of a child, right? We're talking about a 13-year-old who was allegedly raped by Donald Trump. In the interest of getting it all out there, why aren't we looking more deeply at those dozen plus allegations against Donald Trump? I think we should. The entire Donald Trump charity scam is falling apart. Last year, Donald Trump's charity was fined because they violated federal rules on what's called self-dealing. And now the entire Donald Trump Charitable Foundation is being dissolved. But that's actually something that Donald Trump promised to do when he was elected to try to avoid conflicts of interest. That announcement may have been carefully timed, I think is what I'm trying to say, to take attention away from renewed interest in the charitable dealings of Eric Trump's charity. Trump's son, Eric Trump, has a charity, and that charity has been caught funneling cancer donations for kids to Trump businesses. And we told you that this was likely going on last June or July, I believe it was. There was a story in Forbes about it. It has again flared up. And Eric Trump's attorney is sort of re-denying these allegations. And the allegations are that people thought they were donating to St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital by playing in various golf tournaments at Trump golf courses. And it was believed that use of the golf course was being donated by the Trump organization, Donald Trump, Eric Trump, whoever ultimately gets to make that decision. But we have since learned that hundreds of thousands of dollars of donations to those events were going to the Trump golf course to pay for the use of the courses for the fundraisers. IRS filings for the Eric Trump Foundation in 2012 show that just under $60,000 were spent on an annual golf invitational fundraiser, Help at Trump National Golf Club in Westchester, New York. That number ballooned by 2013 to over $230,000 and to nearly $250,000 in 2014, according to IRS filings. Now, only some part of that, we believe, went back to the Trump organization, but the cost of that event has ballooned rapidly. This actually appears to be more related to Donald Trump than to Eric Trump, because reportedly, it was Donald Trump who heard that they were not charging for the use of the golf courses for these charitable golf events. And Donald Trump said, oh, no, we've got to start charging for that. So I want to restate that. It seems that Eric Trump was doing the right thing, which is, hey, it's my charity. We own these golf courses. We're not going to bill for the use of the golf courses for my own charity. And then it was Donald Trump who said, Eric, or to whoever, you've got to start charging for the use of our golf courses for your charity event. And if there's any indication that the allegations are true, it's that they aren't being denied by Eric Trump's lawyer. Eric Trump's lawyer put out a statement saying during the past decade, the Eric Trump Foundation has raised over $16.3 million for St. Jude Children's Research Hospital while maintaining an expense ratio of just 12.3%. The Eric Trump Foundation was also responsible for building a $20 million ICU, which treats the sickest children anywhere in the world suffering from the most catastrophic terminal illness. It doesn't matter what your expense ratio is if the charity president is billing services from his own business and collecting hundreds of thousands of dollars from it. And you can tell when these denials are not denials, when you have allegation, you funneled hundreds of thousands in donations to your business. And the denial is, here's a list of nice things that we've done over time. This should enrage everyone, but particularly anybody who has been touched by cancer or has fundraised around cancer, which I've done, right? As some of you know, my dad has been living with multiple myeloma, which is a type of blood cancer, for 9 years. And I've done fundraisers and I've run 5Ks. And I go to people and say, will you sponsor me to run this race for cancer research? And if I found out that the organizer of the event had a business that they were funneling money into when I'm putting myself out there, emailing people and saying, hey, I'm doing this. Can you donate money to me so that I can do this and raise money because this is something that impacts my family? And then I find that someone is picking up hundreds of thousands of dollars because of the location at which the event was held. Can anyone think of anything lower than redirecting cancer money for kids to your for-profit business? It is absolutely disgusting. And people are discussing this on the David Pakman Show subreddit, which you can access by going to davidpakman.com/REDDIT. We will take a break. Part 2 of our deep dive into race and IQ is coming up next.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
So let's get to part 2 of our deep dive investigation into race and IQ. We will pick it up roughly where we left off yesterday. Take a look. There's a mountain of scholarship directly debunking the claims made in the bell curve. The APA, along with a multitude of intelligence experts, have agreed that the bell curve, like most other modern attempts to link genetic intelligence to race, rely on a few fundamental assumptions that are just not supported by science. One, that there must be enough genetic differences between races and enough genetic similarities within races to biologically tie intelligence to race. That IQ test scores must be synonymous with general intelligence and innate intelligence, and that intelligence must be primarily based on genetics and not on environment. Let's start with the first false assertion, that it's legitimate to even have a conversation about genetic intelligence in terms of race. The truth is, trying to figure out the average genetic intelligence of different races is essentially arbitrary and meaningless. First of all, over time, there have been countless definitions of race. People throughout history have divided humans into races in many different ways, and even today, different people in different parts of the world use varying definitions when they're talking about race. For instance, are people from India and people from Japan part of the same race? What about people from Spain and people from Russia? You're going to get different answers to those questions in different contexts. But even in the way we talk about race today in the US, things don't have that much biological basis. Let's say that some examples we accept of races are white, black, maybe East Asian, maybe Native American. These labels have a lot of important social significance, which is why the idea of race is valid when we're talking about the census or political polls. But there is no such thing as race in genetics and biology. So studies that examine correlations between genetic race and innate intelligence are inherently flawed from the get-go. The United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization declared as early as 1950 that there is no such thing as race in biology based on the findings of an international panel of leading anthropologists, geneticists, sociologists, and psychologists. And this is still the scientific consensus today, supported by the National Institutes of Health, the American Medical Association, the American Psychological Association, and the American Anthropological Association. In the study of genetics, there is no way to break humans up into races. Now, that is not to say that there isn't genetic variation between human populations. There obviously is, but race is biologically not a definable construct. There is no white gene or black gene. There is no one gene that all people from a given race have. In genetics, there is no such thing as blackness or whiteness. Genetic variation is fluid. It's possible to use DNA to figure out where someone comes from geographically with some accuracy, but no one who believes in genetic races is able to accurately tell us which genes should be tested to determine someone's race. People subjectively make social distinctions about race based on things like skin color, hair, and eye shape, which are based in genetics, but the crucial thing to understand is that those traits don't predict everything else about a person's entire genetic makeup. Someone's skin color doesn't necessarily tell you whether or not they're going to have dimples or whether or not color blindness runs in their family. Skin color also doesn't tell you anything about a person's intelligence. So maybe you're thinking, well, hold on, certain races are more susceptible to certain diseases, so why can't certain races be smarter than others? Here's one example. There's this common misconception that Black people, people with African heritage, as a race, are genetically inclined to get sickle cell anemia. Not exactly true. The misconception goes like this. Skin color is inherited, and sickle cell disease is inherited. Therefore, sickle cell disease is caused by race. Susceptibility to sickle cell is a response to a certain population being exposed to malaria for a long period of time over many generations. And malaria is only rampant in certain parts of Africa. So only people of African descent that come from certain parts of Africa have the gene for sickle cell, not all Black people. And by the way, there has also historically been a lot of malaria in Southern Europe, the Middle East, and South Asia, and populations from those regions also have the sickle cell gene. It's not a Black phenomenon. Humans can be split up into separate populations that have significantly similar genetics, but these populations are confined to relatively small geographical regions. For example, two people with 100% of their genetic heritage coming from the same village in Eastern Europe many generations ago are likely to have significant genetic similarities. But when you compare those people with someone of Scottish genetic heritage, there end up being far fewer genetic similarities. So even though a fully Eastern European person and a fully Scottish person both appear to be white, and in many cases these two people may be ethnically indistinguishable in their appearance, it's useless to lump them into the same category as white in order to test for other outcomes like intelligence. We don't yet know which genes are associated with intelligence, but we can't assume that whatever genetics are manifesting make them both appear white are also tied in with all other genetic traits they may have, like their intelligence. There are just not enough genetic similarities within what we refer to as a race to make assumptions about other aspects of a person's genetics. There's even huge genetic variation within local regions like Scandinavia or the Iberian Peninsula or Southeast Asia. There are several thousand genetically similar human populations on Earth. You have to go to a very micro level geographically to find humans with significant genetic similarities, and 85% of human genetic variation takes place within these tiny individual populations. So even comparing these small local populations wouldn't necessarily give us any useful data about intelligence, much less comparing people by continent. Classifying all of these thousands of groups in order to further test for outcomes like intelligence in a meaningful way would be really difficult, but it's especially meaningless to report findings about a very specific set of genetic traits like intelligence in relation to someone's skin color or continent of origin. And biologically measuring anything in terms of race is especially problematic in the Western Hemisphere because it's so common for people's genetics to have a multitude of geographical origins, even though people socially identify with a particular race. If someone in the US is 5/8 Black and 3/8 white, they will probably, for social reasons, identify as Black because they look like what we think of as a Black person. So even if intelligence was tied to race, how would we know which intelligence genes are being expressed in that person? Are they manifesting the Black intelligence or the white intelligence? Very few people in the US can trace their ancestry back to a single place. The average African American genome is 24% European. The average American Latino genome is 18% Native American, 65% European, and 6% African. And where those genetics come from within those continents is also going to vary a lot. So when someone takes an IQ test and simply tells you their race, there are a ton of genetic variables that are just not being accounted for. Another big problem with using IQ tests to judge the average innate intelligence of different races is assuming that IQ is the same as a person's general intelligence. Like I said before, the idea of intelligence is very complex and it manifests in a number of different ways. It's like trying to measure if someone is a nice person. What are we really measuring? We shouldn't discount IQ tests wholesale because IQ tests are good at measuring what it is that they measure. But the important thing is not to misinterpret IQ. There's a common misconception that IQ is a measure of someone's overall intelligence that they're born with. That is not what IQ is, and any intelligence expert will tell you that. A person's general intelligence can't be summed up by one number. IQ tests measure only a set of specific skills, and these skills have to be acquired. All IQ tests measure is a person's ability to perform particular cognitive tasks like reading comprehension, a person's ability to work with analogies and do other certain analytical tasks, and to measure what kind of vocabulary they have. That's a pretty narrow range of what we could consider to be intelligence, and whether it even measures any aspects of intelligence is questionable, depending on whether you define intelligence as someone's potential to perform or someone's actual performance. But humans aren't just blank slates at birth. We don't all have the same amount of potential to learn those skills and have higher IQs. Some people are born with biological predispositions to better learn the skills that IQ measures. But after you're born, your acquisition of those skills is mostly determined by your environment, which accounts for most of your IQ. We don't know what the limits of what a person's IQ can be unless they have the right resources. And the phenomenon that the IQ scores of a particular person tend to remain more or less the same at different ages isn't evidence that IQ is innate and unchanging because of biology. This just shows what should be obvious, that a person's environmental conditions are likely to stay the same throughout their development, and many studies have shown that intervening in a child's development with cognitive skills training will raise their IQ. And that is because higher IQs are correlated with better access to resources that foster those cognitive skills. And those resources are more present in the lives of children of higher socioeconomic status. There can be a huge difference between what someone is capable of due to their biological disposition and what skills they obtain because of their environment. A French study published in the journal Nature observed siblings adopted by families of contrasting economic status. They tracked children who had the same biological parents but were adopted and raised from an early age by different families, and they took into account those adoptive families' education, occupations, and income. The study found that being raised in a high socioeconomic status home can boost IQ 12 to 16 points. By the way, that also happens to be the approximate IQ difference between the average white person and the average black person. Psychologist Eric Turkheimer conducted a similar study but assessed twins who were adopted into different families so that the children's genetic makeup would be 100% the same. The study found that the heritability of IQ among children raised by families of low socioeconomic status was only around 10% and a little higher in more affluent families. This suggests that while, IQ can be inherited from parent to child to some degree, children are less able to benefit from their genetics if they're raised in a lower socioeconomic environment, which is to say, if you're a rich kid, you're going to have plenty of educational opportunities and your IQ is more likely to just be what it is, whether high or low. But if you have fewer educational opportunities, your IQ is much more likely to suffer from that. But like I said before, even though some of your IQ can be linked to genetics, there's no meaningful way to relate that to race because there is an incredibly huge amount of genetic variation inside races. But anyway, if IQ tests are evaluating people of drastically different upbringings and environments, then their inherent intelligence is not being assessed in a vacuum. Instead, IQ test scores are just derived from a number of variables that are hard to measure, everything from a person's home life during their development to the quality of their education, to whether or not they have attention deficit issues, to their actual motivation to do well on the test itself. And skills measured on an IQ test are not valued, taught, or used across all groups of people to the same degree. If you take someone who came from a lower socioeconomic class and had less access to quality early childhood education, they are likely to score lower on an IQ test. Let's take two people who were born with the same level of innate intelligence at birth. One of them is an American with great access to quality American education throughout their development, and the other lives in a tribal community who had to learn an entirely different set of skills to survive and succeed in their society. Which of these two people do you think would score better on an IQ test? IQ tests largely measure a person's ability to think abstractly and use theoretical analysis. But if a child isn't immersed in that type of thinking during their development, they're not going to learn as many of those skills. American children are more likely to develop these skills than children in a third world country, and privileged white American children are more likely to develop these skills than a Hispanic American living in a low-income neighborhood. And it's a cycle, right? Well-educated people who make more money have children who are given more educational opportunities to develop these cognitive skills, and uneducated people with less money are more likely to raise children with that same lack of opportunity. Another thing, like I mentioned before, global IQs have been rising since the beginning of the 20th century. This is also evidence that IQ has more to do with environment than genetics. The scientific consensus is that IQs around the world have been rising at a much faster rate than could even possibly be explained by genetics. Human genes can't mutate that quickly. So this huge acceleration in IQ over the past 100 years is most likely due to globalization and dissemination of Western education. During that time, the skills assessed by IQ tests have become more necessary and nurtured in more parts of the world and in lower socioeconomic echelons. And so understandably, guess who has seen the biggest leaps in IQ over the past 100 years? Non-whites and marginalized ethnicities within different societies, all of which supports what we know about IQ being more affected by environment than genetics. So to sum up, race isn't even a valid context to begin with when you're talking about biology, and IQ tests are not the be-all end-all of measuring intelligence. But even when we are just talking about IQ, there is evidence that genetics can determine IQ to some degree, but there is conclusive evidence that environment plays a bigger role in determining IQ. Assumptions we make about groups of people have real-world consequences. The way we see people as groups and as individuals should be rooted in fact. And even though racial differences in IQ are grounded mostly on environment, having prejudices about certain races is still racism. One irony is that people on the right supposedly espouse the ideas of individualism and personhood, yet they are usually the ones who want to make these false judgments about groups of people and make fallacious claims about race and IQ. Another irony is that people on the right are the people who say, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, but it's usually people on the right who perpetuate these inaccurate narratives about certain races being genetically destined to be less intelligent and less successful. The most important thing is that an individual's race can't tell you anything about their intelligence or their character, and human beings should be judged on qualities other than their IQ. But there is certainly no current scientific proof indicating that there are differences in genetic innate intelligence between the social lines that we call race.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Jessica Gallagher used to work for Fox News Radio, and she's currently suing Fox for gender discrimination. And I actually am not interested in talking about the gender discrimination lawsuit. I'm more interested in talking about some of the assertions she made when speaking to a group of British lawmakers and citizens in Parliament recently about Trump, Fox, and Russia. Jessica Gallagher told a group of UK lawmakers and citizens that Fox would not allow her to go to Moscow to investigate possible connections between Donald Trump and Russia, even when she offered to pay her own way going on to say, quote, Fox is just buying what the White House is selling. This really should not come as much of a surprise because we learned earlier this year that Donald Trump colluded with Fox News to take attention away from his ties to Russia. So it really is all par for the course. She offered to pay her own way. She's a journalist and she wanted to do an investigative bit of journalism. And Fox News still told her no. And this might also mean, and this is really what I think we need to be exploring, this also suggests that someone at Fox News within that food chain fears that if all of a sudden Jessica Gallagher or whoever else starts digging into Trump Russia, that they will find things. Because if everybody was satisfied that she would find nothing, why would they try to stop her from paying her own way to investigate this? And I actually feel really terrible for Jessica Gallagher because I am sure that as a result of the publicity that she's getting because of these assertions, she is going to start getting the trolls and the death threats and the entire thing. And the real bigger question that's surfacing is, to what extent is Fox News wrapped into whatever Trump-Russia collusion there may have been? Because this is so unsurprising that it probably won't get as much attention as it deserves, which is really sad. If you have higher ups at Fox News saying, I am going to go out of my way to prevent Jessica Gallagher, even from spending her own money to go and investigate this, has Fox been directed by someone at the Trump administration to prevent serious investigation into that story? Is Fox directly in touch with Russia or Russian agents or individuals? What are the connections? Because this is very, very weird. And what we can be sure of at this point is that other than Shepard Smith some of the time and Chris Wallace a little bit of the time, less time than Shepard Smith, we're dealing with what is effectively in 2017 state media with Fox News. RT recently had to register as foreign agents for their American media presence. Fox News seems to be colluding with or working with or in some kind of implicit agreement, although maybe it's an explicit agreement. Let's assume it's implicit, at least for now, with Fox News to push certain narratives. And think back to the Seth Rich case, right? The timing of Fox News's discussion of that case until, of course, Shepard Smith eventually said, hey, this is nothing. And the usefulness of that reporting to Donald Trump and taking attention away from, I don't even remember at this point, whatever scandal was going on at the time, that timing was suspicious. This is very suspicious. And increasingly, we need to consider whether Fox News, we know that it's not fair and balanced, but we need to consider whether there is some kind of actual working relationship here between Fox News, Donald Trump, and whatever interests may be connected to Russia in this broader investigation. Again, maybe I'm naive. Maybe we will eventually learn from Robert Mueller's investigation what the scope of this coordination is. We have talked about what appears to be a contradiction between being a so-called Christian and supporting Donald Trump. And it doesn't make sense if one calls themselves a Christian to support Donald Trump. And there's a number of reasons why, and we've talked about it. There was a 6-person panel on CNN. 6 Trump voters were brought in, and the entire thing was insane. Truly depraved and insane. But there was one particularly wacky portion of it where a guy was asked, these are all Trump voters, one guy was asked, and this was the guy who was most strongly still in the tank for Trump. Trump could do no wrong in the eyes of this guy who we're going to hear from in a moment. He said that if he heard from Jesus himself that Trump colluded with Russia, he would first want to go and talk to Trump about it. He would not take Jesus's word over Donald Trump's. And of course, many of the people in my audience would say, well, why would anybody take Jesus's word? You have to remember, in the universe of these people, the idea that if they heard from Jesus, they would still check with Trump is pretty stunning. Take a look at this video, listen to the audio.
Let me tell you, if Jesus Christ gets down off the cross and told me Trump is with Russia, I would tell him, hold on a second, I need to check with the president if it's true.
Why do you believe Donald Trump over everybody else? Why?
I believe in him. He's a good man. He has taken so much shots for us.
Yeah. Maybe this is a good thing, right? Like the guy's not so ideologically committed to Christianity that he'd believe a regular old human over the supposed son of God. But at the same time, maybe he sees Trump as God, and that's why he would take Trump's word over Jesus's word. This guy actually made the other 5 panelists look slightly reasonable. Like the other 5 panelists during this 6-person thing seemed to have some signs of regret or buyer's remorse or hesitation about what Donald Trump has done, but not this guy. And guys like this are why I don't believe there's really any hope for Trumpists at large or en masse to ever turn around, see the error of their ways. And that's why I've been advising, I mean, really since the election, that we should forget about these people in terms of winning elections, right? If you're going to see people like this at Thanksgiving, we'll hear from Pat about whether he's going to have people like this arguing this vociferously for Trump at Thanksgiving. If you want to debate them for the fun of it, if Pat wants to have debates at Thanksgiving during vegan Thanksgiving, I don't know if you want to waste your time or not, but if you want to do it, go ahead, have at it, Haas. But from a voting standpoint, get out the vote for progressives and moderates who don't typically vote. That is a much more effective use of your time, because you're not going to convince guys like this that Trump is terrible for them and terrible for America. That's the one good thing, right? Which is that because voter turnout is typically so low in American elections, we can defeat these people without having to convince these people of anything just based on voter turnout. But we have to do it, right? That's the thing. And the midterms aren't exactly the time for massive voter turnout or high voter enthusiasm. My only hope is that because everything is different in the Trump era, that there actually will be circumstances and an environment where we will see more engagement from progressives and left-leaning moderates during the midterms. We can completely marginalize this group of total extremists, but it's going to take action. It's going to take activism. And one effect of the Russian Twitter bots and sort of the pro-Trump fake news sites and everything else has been, it makes us think that Trump bots like this guy are way more common than they are. And the truth is, yes, there are millions and millions of them, but they aren't that common when you consider the entire voting age population of the United States. And we need to activate those other people, particularly those that are not voting. Can you imagine if guys like this were the majority or even the plurality in our country? It's truly disturbing, but the only silver lining, and it's been tough. Pat's done a good job of finding somewhat strange, but silver linings nonetheless. I've been trying to find silver linings in the Trump era. One of them is that on voter turnout alone, we can defeat these people. And scary stuff. I encourage you to watch the full 6-person Trump voter panel on CNN. Incredibly disturbing. The stuff of nightmares. We've got a voicemail number. It is 219-2-DAVID-P, and we have a caller who was weighing in on the recent Jenga experience. Let's take a listen to it.
Hey, David and Pat. I don't know whose idea it was, or if it was a collective idea for the Jenga thing, but there was something on that I really wanted to watch at 7 o'clock, but you're on at 7. And I thought, but I want to see if that Jenga tower falls or not this time. So whatever you're doing, however you come up with those crazy ideas, keep it up. This is Robert from California signing off.
Very good. And Robert has fully signed off. Yeah, people I got a couple voicemails, including one from the Eggman, saying that it really didn't translate to audio. But I would have imagined, Pat, that the crashing of the Jenga tower would have been an interesting audio moment. It is true that it is definitely more visual than audio.
Slightly more visual, yeah, I would say. And this was your idea, to your credit.
It was, but I think to your credit, you didn't tell me it was a disastrous idea, because if you had, I might have rethought it. So I think we can both take some responsibility for what ultimately took place, which was the Jenga game.
I tragically fell down in the studio, and I think that's what inspired you as well.
Yeah, when Pat fell, I thought there might be something to this falling down thing that could be used to generate memberships, because nothing's funnier than falling. When people don't get hurt, obviously. And that's where I came up. And by the way, if we switch to our other camera, Pat, people will see that the Jenga tower has been rebuilt and is kind of accompanying me like a mascot of sorts on the desk. Although we don't know what we're doing next. We'll talk about it on an upcoming bonus show. Okay, a woman has been arrested for putting an obscene anti-Trump message on her truck, and now she might be filing a lawsuit. We will talk about that on today's bonus show. We also have learned that coffee grounds are being used not to power up producer Pat, but to power up London's buses. And also Fox News Judge Jeanine Pirro got a ticket for speeding at 119 miles per hour. Will she now face the sweet justice that we've all been waiting for Judge Jeanine to face for her unhinged rants on right-wing media? Or will she use her connections to get out of trouble? All of those stories and more on today's bonus show. 2 ways to sign up, davidpakman.com/membership and patreon.com/davidpakmanshow. We will speak to you on the bonus show. It's a good one today.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.